Welcome, Mark. Thank you. Oops. Back in. Before we get started, so some of you have been here for the last half an hour. Okay? In the last half an hour, how far have you physically moved? So you've been here for about a half an hour or so. How far did you physically move in terms of meters or kilometers? Not a lot. 0. 500 kilometers. You've moved physically 500 kilometers in the last half an hour. Why is that? Have you ever noticed how sometimes it gets dark outside? Do you know why that is? Basic stuff. Turns out we live on a planet called the Earth. And on planet Earth, it turns out that the Earth spins at 1,000 kilometers per hour. So physically, we are 500 kilometers away from where we started 30 minutes ago. Anybody got another answer? Obviously, it's also 17,500 kilometers. Because our Earth spins around the sun at 35,000 kilometers per hour. In fact, it's also 400,000 kilometers. Because after all, our galaxy is traveling at 800,000 kilometers per hour. Now, this is very important, and I hope one of the big takeaways you can get from this is that it turns out nothing is real. Everything depends on your perspective. If you think in the last half an hour you haven't moved at all, you're entirely correct. And yet, I'm sure, if you change your mind even just a little bit, you realize that you have also gone 400,000 kilometers. And the reason why I'm saying this as we begin to do innovation is that many of the companies in here have been doing innovation for 100 years. That's nothing new. Some of you have been doing design thinking for 10 years. That's nothing new either. And yet what we find is that when we look at the very best innovators, the people that have done truly exceptional things for customers, shareholders, and employees, they've changed their perspective. So what we're going to get into today is pretty much looking at innovation from a new perspective, and I'm going to be sharing with you the missing piece of the puzzle, which is scaling. Now, a little bit of background around myself. So by the way, my accent, in case you're wondering, I was born in Canada. My parents are from South Africa. I grew up in England. I've lived in Amsterdam, Johannesburg, Paris, Los Angeles, and I now live in Berlin. Also, hallo, ich kann dann Deutsch sprechen, aber ich bin schlauer auf Englisch. But I don't speak German, so I ignore that. When I started off, I was doing what I called suggestion programs. So I created some software, and I was working with big companies, and I would tell my mother I was doing suggestion programs. Do you have an idea? Please put your idea in here. But obviously, this was collective intelligence and collaboration systems. And my very first project with Bristol Myers Squibb added $200 million to the launch revenue of the glucophage drug. I became fascinated in looking at innovation to see all kinds of different aspects. But one of the reasons, particularly why I was fascinated, is that I realized at a point in my life that we adults are just children in older bodies. I am a 12-year-old child, and I just happen to be currently inhabiting on this planet a body that's 48 years old. But so I became super curious about how things worked. And one of the first things that I had is that I was doing some work at McDonald's in America, and they described to me how they had an innovation program, and they had, let's say, really, really cool lettuce burgers. Their problem, though, was not coming up with an idea for a lettuce burger. Their problem was, how do we sustainably source 1 billion pieces of lettuce every single year? They had a problem of scale. And if we look at McDonald's right now, I don't know if you can see the picture, but there's a picture of an old lady sitting there on a couple of chairs. Can you guess what that is, that sort of top picture up there? It's a digital twin restaurant. McDonald's have created, basically, there's a warehouse in Chicago. They can download data from any of their stores, historic data, and when they have plans for new products, new processes, new methods, they can replicate it in physical reality in 24 hours. Because rather than rolling out the lettuce burger, we need to see if it scales. Also, as scaling a company like McDonald's, they deliberately use markets to test products before they go global. McCafe, an incredible product from McDonald's, they started that off in Australia in 1993, and it took 10 years to kind of tweak it before it went to America. And even now, it was fascinating. I was speaking to many people doing great innovation work, and we found that there was a big difference between the companies that really delivered huge value and the companies that followed exactly the same methods and didn't deliver value at all. And one of the, let's say, sort of sneaky insights that we found was executive immersion. How much do your board directors, your chief executives are physically there when you're doing your innovation things so they can immerse themselves? Here is the current CEO of McDonald's using a self-service system. And because they can personally experience and understand it, they're able to sign off on budget, tweak it, see how it fits their overall strategy. But therefore, I became fascinated by scaling. Gotcha. But now, I'm not going to ask you all to define innovation, because if there's, 400 people invited to this, I'm sure there will be 600 definitions of innovation. But just to keep things really simple, I'll give a classic definition of innovation, which is that it's a process of doing new things that delivers value. And the key thing that seems to be missing from most people's implementation of this is that they forget about the delivering value piece. Because after all, it's much more exciting to do a design workshop than it is to actually make serious amount of money from these things. So what I've found is that very often the innovation program that we have today is that there is an over-focus on creativity. There's an over-focus on making prototypes and doing little designs, and what we really have to do is we have to work out how we make money out of these things afterwards, or make social change in the world. So what I've been looking at, therefore, is how do we scale? How do we scale stuff? Now, when we look at this, many people use the word growth as a synonym for scaling, but they're really quite different. Because you can grow a business in a linear way. It costs you $1 million for one outlet, $2 million for two, obviously $4 million for four. That is not scaling. That is linear growth. In addition to that, some people think that the world is all about numbers, profit, and revenue, but it turns out there are many metrics that you may want to scale. You may want to scale number of users. You may want to scale number of swipes if you're doing Tinder. You shouldn't all be doing Tinder now. Please pay attention to me. You at the back there, stop. But so what I've been looking at then is how do we do scaling, but particularly then, and by the way, I'm extremely lazy. Really, 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 really lazy. But one of the nice lazy things is that if you want to do scale and get a big result, is that you need to do small, smart moves. How can you do as little work as possible to get a really big result? So I'll give an example, and I'll give, let's say, a social good example, and then we'll switch into the corporate world. How many of you have heard of the Global Teacher Prize? It was recently announced in Dubai, and a British teacher, this one here, won it. A Palestinian teacher has won it. This is a $1 million prize for the world's best teacher. They get $1 million in cash. By the way, can anybody see a problem with that? They might leave teaching. And even if they don't want to leave teaching, they might be married, and their spouse might want the money. It's tricky. So this prize was first announced about 5 years ago, and I was in the room, and Bill Clinton was one of the announcers, and it's the Varkey Foundation, this incredible NGO that is doing this. And I began to think, this is an incredible way of making change at huge scale, because we can change how teachers work, we can find great role models, but we need to design this in a really smart way. So some of the small, smart moves we did this to make this thing huge, and now there are 30,000 people apply, 8 different languages, teaching children between the ages of 5 and 18, drama teachers, physics teachers, Munich, Tanzania. It's a huge thing. And here are some of the small, smart moves that we did. One of them, being very lazy, is that if you Google search teacher prize, it turns out that many countries have teacher prizes. Many professions, like geography teachers, have teacher prizes. So one of our network hacks, our scaling hacks, was deliberately a network strategy to say, find networks where great people already exist, teachers' unions, etc., and ask those networks to do the work for us. Fantastic, really easy stuff. Then the use of network hubs. How do we attract people at scale? So last year, the winner was announced by Pope Francis. Many people know who Pope Francis is, and because Pope Francis has a huge following, more people paid attention to the thing, the use of a network hub. Other things then is the use of communities, but particularly I like the power of the crowd. Now, I didn't really know what topic this was going to be, so quite often when I do a talk on scaling, I do a talk called 50 Shades of Scaling. it sadly turns out that one of the most successful books of all human history is 50 Shades of Grey. Terrible book. Basically, it's unreadable in any language. But what's very interesting with that is that even 50 Shades of Grey used the power of the crowd. When she began to publish for free, she had 34,000 people commenting around to sort of develop the idea and develop the book content. It didn't help much, but at least it was part of involving the crowd. And the same thing here. The small, smart move is to say, rather than us trying to find the best teacher and pick them out of the room, how about we have a big prize and everybody will announce themselves? Okay, so we just started. We're getting into scaling. We're giving some examples of small, smart moves. But let's look at scaling, because scaling is an interesting one. I actually started doing work around design thinking. And it's interesting that most people think about scaling once you have your design. You have your product, and now it's time to scale it. But it turns out you can design for scale. And in fact, one of the best pieces of advice is you put scaling at the beginning of your design process. I'll give you a little example. 50 Shades of Grey. Can't remember the German version, but most of the international versions were black with a picture of a tie on it. It was such an innocent front cover. I met a woman, a grandmother, and she bought for her 14-year-old granddaughter 50 Shades of Grey because it was the best-selling book and it was in a supermarket. That was designed to scale. So when we think about scaling, we're looking at how do you scale your designs, and then how do you scale what you have, how do you build in scaling. But also, if we look at this is then how do we scale our innovation process so that we can do more for less? And then afterwards, how do we scale this up to get big value for the company? Just thinking about the scaling process, so this is a little bit of the eye chart thing, but we can clearly see that McDonald's has a great use of data. They're using data from all of their stores as historic data to feed their innovation process to save them time. Because after all, it's idiotic to spend a year in a closed room or a really cool venue and then go out and then find out your customers don't like it. So can we use existing data to help us? We can use things like machine learning. It's interesting, and I'm building a new application myself, a sort of AI matching engine. And it's interesting that either you build your AI with huge amounts of existing data, or you can build it with nothing. And if you rethink how machines learn, machines can learn very quickly from almost no data, if you just sort of rethink how it's done. I've mentioned the digital twins for restaurants. Partnering is one we're going to get into. But I'm going to then look at some challenges before we get into the specifics, because here's a slide, and I was warned that maybe we shouldn't present this slide here. Now, what we already know is that many German companies are absolutely the best innovators in the world. Your products are fantastic. However, not everybody is like this. But the real reason why I had this slide, this is from Handelsblatt, and I disagree with many of their conclusions. But what it highlighted for me is that we have an elephant in the room. Now, I don't know, is there a German expression, the elephant in the room? Maybe we need to create one and bring this thing in. But right now, in America, the concept of the elephant in the room is that there's a problem that everybody knows is there. We can really obviously see it, because it's an elephant. But everybody kind of walks around the elephant. Well, there is a problem, because if you don't move the elephant out of the room, within a few days or months, your whole room is covered in elephant poop. So you have to get rid of the elephant in the room. And one of the elephant in the room things that I found is basically management. And very often it's our corporate targets. Very often, I was speaking in Zurich to one of the companies there. What they were describing is that one of their biggest innovation problems is the internal targets they use to measure performance. Because the new innovation stuff will never be as good or as successful or as reliable than the base business. And these are the elephant in the room problems that we have to begin to address. It could be management, working practices. We need to address the elephant in the room, or you will be sitting in a room full of elephant shit. Okay, we don't want that. But let's look then about how some companies have begun to build capacity to scale. This is probably one of the most shocking stories. Anybody in here a lawyer? Okay, you'll probably still be around, but the ones that are studying now probably won't be. JP Morgan have developed a capacity for artificial intelligence and machine learning. They then spent 2 years taking one division which had 12,000 legal contracts per year. The AI learned how these contracts are being processed by humans, and pretty much then when they turned the switch on, they were able to replace 400 lawyers. That's $36 million of annual cost. And it went from taking between 2 weeks and 4 weeks to process a legal document down to a half a second. Now we can quickly see how capitalism works. We can see how corporate works, because if you're the division that's just saved $36 million of profit, you're a superstar. So you in the other division, you have to do the same thing. And you in a different bank, you have to copy the same thing as well. What we find, though, is that you have to build capacity. You have to start learning this now. And even if, by the way, you're the laggard in your industry, it's never going to happen to us, you know through history it will happen to you eventually. You have to build capacity. We're talking about a lot about actually working with partners, because you don't have to do everything yourself. Be lazy, get other people to go do this, but quite often there's a mindset that needs to happen. So we do need to think about working with partners, but this is the next thing then, is that there's a certain type of scaling that becomes actually genuinely difficult. This is when you scale systems. Anybody got an idea what this is a map of? Electric vehicle charging stations. Well, now this might be awesome that you have a really, really good battery for cars. However, this fits within a huge system. And so a lot of times when people do scaling, they don't realize that a particular challenge of scaling is when you have to change a whole system. So these are just tricky things. These are some challenges to think about. But let's finish off and let's get into scaling in action. So this is an example of Rolls-Royce Ship Intelligence. So Rolls-Royce have a relatively boring business where they provide engines and service engines for ships. Well, what's the big deal? Well, they gradually, obviously in their aircraft business, they've worked out and transformed their business into providing flights, providing time in the air. And they're trying to take that business model and bring it into the shipping world. And that very quickly means there's a whole bunch of different technologies that are required to do this. And I'll just pick out one that I really quite like. They have LiDAR, which is short range, I'd say sort of radar, that can sit on a boat. And then you can find out if there's a fishing boat, whatever, a little dinghy that's going right in front of you. Because obviously you should only hit small boats in action movies, not in real life. It's bad. But so right now, and then here is the artificial intelligence, the augmented reality sort of heads-up display, so that the ship captain can manage the boats and the shipping. But there's another reason why I really like the Rolls-Royce example, because I live in the practical real world. Even though I have my 25-year plan to change the whole world, I'm extremely practical. Doing a ship intelligence business is really expensive. It requires resources that companies sometimes don't have. So Rolls-Royce actually recently announced that they were selling this business off, hopefully getting a piece of the upside, because it can't fit their traditional business. So begin to get very practical about how do we really need to think about scaling. Another example that I quite like is John Deere. So John Deere also have realized that sure, we can just sell you a tractor, but ultimately you can tell, they'd say, look, allow us to use your land, and we want to take a piece of everything you grow. But what's interesting with John Deere is that they don't have a policy of openness. There's a variety of reasons why they've got high quality, high accuracy, but they're actually doing closed system innovation. But they're so focused on what end customers want, that they're able to build their system, whether it's GPS tied to crop yield, tied to machine learning, tied to that they can really scale and have a very, very successful business out of doing that, taking, let's say, the research from the laboratories and then actually pushing it through their channel worldwide. Here's another good one. Have any of you ever had a car accident or an accident and made an insurance claim? Really? You drive that well? So MetLife, Standard Life, and a few insurance companies right now, they obviously have people calling up to say, hi, I've broken something. What they've done is that they're using a machine learning, so an artificial intelligence that is listening in on the calls. So you remember this thing, hi, your call may be recorded for customer services purposes. Well, they've actually using some software that is a listening engine, and they're trying to find out, is the customer stressed? And what it does is that the customer sounds as though they're really stressed. This little message pops up on the customer service person's screen to say, hey, chill, you might need a little bit of help now. Basically, it's doing a behavioral nudge on screen based on what they're hearing. Well, the scaling piece of this is that, sure, you could do a little prototype in one little office, but what's interesting is when you can scale it up to 1,000 customer service reps and handle twice as much business without hiring twice as many people. There's a whole bunch of super interesting things we see about how technology is being experimented with, and then you have to change working practices to put it into place. I'm not sure how many of us would like to have our voices listened to every single day, and you can begin to see why there are some scaling, like human challenges, but we can definitely see these things happening as the technology allows us to scale. And just one final example, and then we wrap up. I was asked a lot about personalization, personalized medicine, personalized everything else, and I did a quick Amazon search around personalized medicine, and I don't know how many of you here are pharmaceutical companies, but this is a really big thing. And in fact, all of us, if we were to get sick, we'd like to be treated for ourselves. So I did the Amazon research, but then I found a very interesting thing, and this is, I think, a good, scary message for us to end up with as an example. Amazon will be a huge player in personalized medicine, because it turns out that many of the personalized medicine activities have data sets that are all being managed on the Amazon cloud. And whilst we might think today of traditional businesses being a car business or a pharma business, we can see that there are many businesses that will scale in a dramatically different way. And so right now we need to watch out for the data players, people that have got, let's say, a different perspective of the industry. Now, we don't have time for pro tips, but I'll give you just like one. Have a product manager. Scaling requires internal sales, marketing, and everything else. One of the easiest things that people fail is to think about their product that they've developed as like a product. We've talked about networks, we've talked about ecosystems, but maybe the last thing is to say, this isn't magic, although you can use magic. If you've got magic, brilliant. If you have a nice sorting hat, fantastic. But right now, you need to develop scaling plans. And there is a scaling plan. I wrote a book on scaling, and I'm going to be here the whole day. But just to wrap up, thank you very much for your time. What we have is that we do need to move from just, let's say, pure innovation, as in coming up with new things, and we need to deliberately design to scale. And as we do that, we can scale up our innovation process. And then the real thing, we can then give a return to our shareholders, our employees, by scaling out what we have and making a real difference. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. Vielen Dank. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Very good.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
Thanks a lot.
Fascinating talk.
You know, I'm looking forward to two things. One is the maybe disconsent of Liz in the fourth row from Novartis on your Amazon drug. Maybe. No, we check out later. She comes on stage. Second is we're going to meet you on the panel later.
Yes.
Yeah? So that's very good. But three questions maybe for the moment?
You talked about actually an enormous complex world, because what you said is you have to grade yourself your digital infrastructure. Yep. You have to look at the tools, the management, the talent. You have to scale design processes to scale innovation. You have to scale the innovation itself. How do companies start? You know, and this is not the world. This is now the German-speaking region. What do you recommend for the companies to do here?
Would you like the public version or the real version?
Oh, the real version.
Have a target. Like, it sounds really, you need to have a target. The thing that just frustrates the hell out of me is that people begin to do innovation and they don't know how much money do you need to generate, what percentage of revenue. If you don't have a target, you don't know which direction to go in. You don't know how far to go. So the first thing you should do is set a target.
So we have all these great innovators here without a target? That's what
I would imagine that half of them don't have decent targets.
What do you mean by target?
Well, it could be amount of revenue you'd like to make in 3 years from your innovation.
Actually, you are right on that one. We are screening the top 500 companies and see who publishes the digital service revenues. Mm-hmm. They do. Of the top 500 in the country, almost nobody does it. They don't set self some target. So you're right, actually, on that one.
Well, and in fact, I do a lot of work around complex systems, and what is fascinating is that your end goal changes everything. So a target basically changes your focus. So let's say, I mean, for you guys, you got like a revenue target like this. Well, I would just give you a thing, double it. Well, all of a sudden, if you double it, you need to think differently, because you don't want to double your overhead at the same time. Maybe you do, but you probably shouldn't. So then it forces you to concentrate and look at the world differently and change your perspective, and then we go back to the fact that it gets dark sometimes and bright sometimes.
So maybe last question, do you see in our region some best practices?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I drive them.
You want to? Here we go.
I drive them. My house is powered by them. So absolutely, yes. There is.
You want to point some out?
I won't say. I mean, I do drive a BMW. I've never got into the Porsche thing, but they're also cool. And the Mercedes stuff is cool. And there are. What is interesting about German innovation is that. And by the way, my wife is German. My 2 kids are German. And I've become more and more German, even though I'm living in Berlin, which is kind of German. You are sensical, logical, you are structured. If there is an issue, you will eventually figure out how the issue works, and then you put a plan in place, and then you execute.
Okay, very quick question to that. But are the big challenges for corporates, are they rather in scaling innovation, rather tech-driven or human-driven? Just quick question.
Super interesting. So, technology without people doesn't work. People without technology doesn't scale.
Okay.
You have no choice but to use technology.
But Andrea, I think what we have to do is set more ambitious targets.
Oh, absolutely.
Scale the process, scale the innovation, be courageous.
Completely.
Okay, see you later. We could go on for hours, but we see you later on the panel.
Big round of applause.
Thank you so much, Mark Turrell.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you.
Was ich Ihnen bisher verschwiegen habe, ist, dass wir Sie ja interaktivieren wollen im heutigen Prozess. Wären Sie so nett, Ihre Smartphones zu zücken, wenn Sie das nicht schon getan haben? Seien Sie bitte so lieb, gehen Sie in Ihrem Browser auf slido.com.
Können wir das mal sehen? Genau.
Enter the word slido.com in your browser. Es gibt dort ein freies Feld, automatisch poppt auf, und packen Sie bitte das Wort Innovation dort rein, hinter dem Hashtag. Und was wir von Ihnen jetzt wollen, ist, die Frage mit einem einzigen Wort zu beantworten, so komplex sie sei. Please enter the answer in English, one word. What is the one thing that helps scaling innovation in your own organization? We give you a minute for that, and we collect the results in a word cloud.
Ja, jetzt haben wir so einen Markt gehört.
Und du auch.
Oh, ich hab's da drüben.
Ja, du auch. Hol mal her. Hol mal das Smartphone. Wir wollen deine Antwort wissen.
Jetzt haben wir von Marc gehört, was Marc denkt. Ich bin gespannt, was unser Publikum denkt.
Sehr. Oh, geht ja schnell. People in the center. Culture. A leadership. Pragmatism, partners. Target, network. Entrepreneurship, yes. Smart data. Smart data. Openness. Love, I love that. Love. Pilots. Management, that goes to leadership. Riemensberger, did you put it in?
Oh no, I'm not that far yet.
On the way. Targets, okay, again. Enthusiasm, do you go for that? Enthusiasm? Mindset, yes, we're gonna talk about that too. Maybe somewhat team, yeah, team. Ambition goes with the enthusiasm. Strategy for sure. Okay, okay, I think, don't you think?
Ich glaube, wir kriegen da eine Richtung raus.
Ich glaube, wir kriegen da eine Richtung. Und People bleibt, People, Culture, Leadership und Mindset bleibt in the middle.
Ich glaube, wir sollten mal den Mike auf die Bühne bitten.
Mike Sutcliffe.
You want to join us on stage?
Thank you.
Can I just introduce you properly?
Sure.
You're Accenture Digital, that's for sure. You're the
Yes.
Group Chief Executive.
I am.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Michael is obviously with Accenture. And Michael, you scaled digital in Accenture from 0 to how many people working?
About 50,000 now.
So 50,000 people from 0.
Yep.
You know, we're talking here about innovation, scaling innovation. Before we go to the word cloud or back to the word cloud, what is your experience? How do you drive scale into organizations?
Well, I mean, I think the comment on target's a good one, right? Pierre set a target for us to be at 50% of Accenture's revenue as digital revenue in 5 years. And we've actually just passed that point in just over 5 years. So having a big ambition of what to do and a very pointed ambition in terms of where you want to see the result.
So being ambitious, being clear where you go.
Yep.
What are the major building blocks you put in place to You know, we heard Mark talking about the process and the innovation itself. How did you go about it?
Well, I mean, the first thing that we tried to understand is where we needed to build new muscle. So we've made quite a large number of acquisitions. You're going to hear from Macavision a little bit later today, one of the newer members of the family. But we went out and we found people who had different skill sets and capabilities because we believed that innovation was connecting dots, and we needed people to be able to see the world through a different lens, bring different experiences. But we had shared value, and the value for us was, could we create value for our clients, right? And so we bring people with lots of different cultures, experiences, backgrounds, skills together, but one common goal: can we go create new value? And that seems to help people focus.
So you broadened the skill set, added new perspectives, new members of the family, making work and run in the same direction.
Yeah, and what's interesting is out of the 50,000 people that we have inside of Accenture Digital, very few transferred from somewhere else within Accenture. Most of them are new to the firm in the past 5 years.
Make a guess. What will be the figure in 5 years' time? Beyond 50,000. Make a guess.
You know, I think not tremendously more. I mean, maybe 60, 70,000, because what's happening is the rest of Accenture is rotating. So we have 450,000 people in Accenture. One of our jobs was to help the rest of Accenture rotate, and we're now seeing that happen at scale. So I've got about 50,000 within Accenture Digital, but we have another 150,000 that work on digital every single day. They're just in a different part of our organization structure. So I'm not sure we need our organization to get that much bigger. But as we work in new areas like quantum computing or immersive reality or some of the work that we're doing in Industry X.0, we'll have to add more muscle to the firm. And that'll be why we grow.
Yeah. Let's take a look at the word cloud, what our audience brought back to us. The question was, what is the one thing that helps scaling innovation in your own organization? And what we see here is people at the center, people with the mindset, culture, the right leadership. There's not even the word technology on it.
If
you think about it.
You're right.
Mike, does this resonate?
Well, it does. I think maybe the words I would have expected to see are both technology and platforms. I think they're missing. You know, one of the things that we've seen is the ability to leverage investments and assets that other people have created and get scale through the ecosystem. So thinking more broadly outside the box of the company and thinking through the ecosystem and where those leverage points are is one of the things that's kind of missing from that word cloud from my perspective.
Technology platforms, you go around in your job, creating digital Accenture. You are in the US, I think some of your largest clients are actually in the Silicon Valley. You go to Japan, you go to China, Singapore, you come a lot to Europe. How you compare what's happening in the regions? Do they all have that as a top number one priority, or are there different concepts around the world?
Well, I think the common areas of leadership, culture, people, mindset is consistent. What's probably different is appetite for risk and willingness to change operating models and business processes. And where we
how do we score on appetite for risk in this region?
More conservative, a little bit more conservative. But you know, the combination that you have to get right is not just doing pilots and prototypes, but it's figuring out which pilots and prototypes you can scale. And so I think it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be first in terms of doing the pilot or the prototype, but you do have to be first in figuring out how to make it scale. And you know, we had a technology trends document a couple years ago where the whole point of that document, the tagline was from disrupted to disruptor. And what we were saying is you don't have to be in one of the innovation communities in order to innovate. Actually, the largest players in most industries can be the fastest innovators because they know how to scale in that particular environment.
Combining with the taking risk in order to scale innovation, where do you look more? To the West, to America, or to Asia? What is more interesting in the moment?
Well, it depends on what kind of innovation, right? If we're looking at artificial intelligence right now, I'm probably looking to the East. If I'm looking at quantum computing,
that's China.
I'm looking to the West. And you know, lots of different topics have different communities. If I'm looking for innovation and security, I'm looking in Israel. You know, they're fantastic. I mean, they have a center of expertise there that has not been replicated anywhere else. So there's no single place to innovate, and nobody has a claim they have the brightest brains in the world. I mean, we have smart people literally all over the planet. And actually, some of the most innovative things that we've seen scale started in Africa or you know, one of the other communities that just didn't have any other choice but to fundamentally break the rules and come up with a new solution.
Leapfrogging.
So,
Yeah, leapfrogging, exactly.
Maybe a last question, Mike. We talk about the process, we talk about the innovation to scale. Let's talk about speed. You know, because at the end of the day, it's a race. And I think that's where many are struggling.
Yeah.
To really accelerate the agile thing, the acceleration of the corporate behaviors.
Yep.
What are the best practices you see yourself on where companies really adopt speed? What do they have to do?
You know, this is one of the things that sounds very, very simple, but so few people do it. And it's just laying out the journey map. Right? What does the journey look like? What happens as you're doing the pilots and the prototypes and moving through the scale process? Who needs to be involved? How do you prepare them? And how do you get others in the ecosystem to play with you? And so if you can have a broad view of what the journey is going to be and start planning ahead of that, then you don't get the bottlenecks in the scale process. Where we see people really struggle is they've come up with a brilliant idea, they've proved that it works, and then they go, oh gosh, I just don't have the talent, or I don't have the ecosystem partnerships, or I don't have the asset base, and now I've got to go build that. And meanwhile, they're losing ground on the idea itself.
So basically holistic and then invest in full speed.
Exactly.
Before we let you go back to your seat, with which question would you like to leave the audience to ask to themselves from tomorrow on, or better from today? Which question should we?
It's the same question our teams ask ourselves internally, which is, what problems can I solve today that I could not have solved 6 months ago? And what's unique is because of this combinatorial effect of all these digital tools, every few months we start to see things that we can do this today. We just couldn't have done it 6 months ago.
Constant reflection.
So just being willing to keep saying there's more out there to learn, and there's more to think through in terms of what do we do with all these wonderful new tools that people are creating for us.
Thank you for the speed dating. And we are with you. We are very happy, and I hope we are looking forward to meet you in workshop number 2 on digital cultures. Will you join it?
I'll be there.
Great. So see you there.
All right, thanks.
Mike, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you.